gift cards from Money Supermarket. Sponsors showcase drama.
All the latest headlines for you now this Wednesday night, with the ITV News at 10.
It is coming down to the wire. Tonight, the US president told Russia it must accept the ceasefire deal or face the consequences.
There are things you could do that wouldn't be pleasant in a financial sense. I can do things financially that would be very bad for Russia. I don't want to do that because I want to get peace.
The Russian president shot back, not until I have retaken the Kursk region. Meanwhile, as European defense chiefs met, our defense secretary had his own message for the Kremlin.
Over to you now. You said you want to talk, prove it. Accept the ceasefire, start negotiations, and end the war.
So, what does happen next? We will try to assess. Also, on News at 10. There is no sign of a cooling of tempers in the trade wars either. Dan is in Canada tonight.
I think he's trying really hard to destabilize things in Canada to create an advantageous situation for himself. I think Canadians are doing a way better job of pushing back, and elbows up, Canada, we're going in hard.
Back here, the PM refuses to rule out cuts to disability benefits in the House of Commons. Poorer than the poorest in Slovenia, once part of the Eastern Bloc. Joel has a shocking report on poverty in the UK, and newly restored, the photos that help tell the story of one of the most shocking days in civil rights history.
You know, what he saw with his own eyes and what he captured on film, it was just so disturbing and so unjust.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. For two world leaders, Presidents Trump and Putin, who have been shadowboxing around a deal to end the fighting in Ukraine, it does not feel like compromise is in the air tonight. For perhaps the first time, Mr. Trump has threatened Russia to agree to a ceasefire. I can do things financially that would be very bad for Russia, devastating for Russia, Mr. Trump warned. For his part, President Putin put on military fatigues for what Russian media said was a visit to a military command center in the Kursk region. That's, of course, the bit of Russia that Ukrainian troops have won from their invaders. Mr. Putin didn't sound like someone about to agree to a ceasefire. He gave the order to keep fighting, to rid Kursk of Ukrainian troops. Any that are captured will be treated like terrorists, he said. In other words, tried and jailed.
It wasn't the official response, but it was immediate. Acts of war amid talk of peace. Within hours of Ukraine accepting a 30-day ceasefire, if Russia did, Ukrainian cities were under attack. According to the Americans, when it comes to peace, the ball is in the Russian court. Unfortunately, it's the bombs that are in Ukraine's. Today, President Zelensky confirmed a 30-day pause would allow for a plan to end the war, including security guarantees.
If all of this is done, then after the plan is prepared and its gradual implementation begins, this will lead to the end of the war. After the war ends, martial law will be lifted, and once martial law is lifted, elections will be held in accordance with Ukrainian legislation. No one will deliberately postpone anything.
The Americans will now put the proposal to the Russians as President Trump calculates his response should they say no.
In a financial sense, yeah, we could do things very bad for Russia. It would be devastating for Russia, but I don't want to do that because I want to see peace. And we're getting close to maybe getting something done.
President Putin donning fatigues and visiting liberated parts of Kursk. The calculation is whether to say no, continue the war, be an obstacle to peace, and risk losing the benefits of the warm relationship developing with President Trump, or agree and risk losing the battlefield impetus that they now have, driving the Ukrainians out of the small bit of Russia they hold. The middle ground which is accepting for now before rejecting later, is also a very real possibility.
Indeed, our task in the near future, in the shortest possible time, is to finally defeat the enemy, who has dug in on the territory of the Kursk region and is still conducting military operations here.
Every flag here marks a life lost in this war, and by no means every life. The Ukrainians know just what a high price they have paid for the fighting that has gone on over all these years. But they also know that false hope is a false friend. And so whilst they wish for peace, they don't expect to see it at any point soon. Emma Murphy, News at 10, Ukraine.
And Robert joins us from Washington tonight. Robert, President Putin didn't sound like a man about to agree to a ceasefire, but that may or may not mean much. What's your own assessment of where we stand with peace efforts tonight?
I think it's significantly too early to pass judgment on the US sort of inspired 30-day peace or at least ceasefire proposal. It hasn't actually officially even been pitched to Moscow. But it's true, Tom, that the optics tonight on Russian television do not look particularly encouraging. There was Vladimir Putin in combat fatigues. He was talking in inflammatory language about how any Ukrainian caught in the region of Kursk would be treated as a terrorist, how mercenaries captured there wouldn't even be subject to the Geneva Conventions. But bear in mind, there's a lot of diplomacy that's still in play. The National Security Advisor here, Mike Waltz, has been speaking to his Russian counterpart today, and Trump's envoy on this ceasefire proposal, Steve Witkoff, is on his way to Moscow to talk to the Kremlin. I would not expect Russia to reject the Trump proposal out of hand. After all, you know, they're having some success in their counterattack in Kursk, so it's in their interests to play for time. And perhaps also what they're playing for is the ultimate kind of symbol of Russia being brought in from the cold, which would be, of course, a direct and high-stakes summit between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump.
Robert, thank you very much indeed. Well, no one can be sure, as Robert was saying, which way Russia is going to go, peace or more war. But European defence ministers are preparing for the peace option and how it will end up being policed. At a meeting in Paris, they have been piecing together what each country can offer. Carl is in Paris now. Carl, how close are they getting, do you think, to pulling a plan together?
Well, certainly something has been starting to take shape here at the old French military hospital in Paris over the last 48 hours. Today, the defence ministers from Europe's 5 biggest military powers, as Britain, France, Germany, Italy and Poland, were presented with a number of what the French called hypotheses, basically scenarios of how a peace assurance mission might start to look in Ukraine. Now, that's boots on the ground, yes, but it's also about things like defending nuclear facilities, about opening up the Black Sea. And I understand that countries are now starting to come forward with the sorts of numbers and capabilities that they might be able to offer towards that. None of it's going to be public, of course, although we do know who's involved. I mean, it's most of Europe, it's a good chunk of NATO, but also countries like Australia, New Zealand and Japan have been here as well. But of course, as we've been hearing, none of this will happen, as John Healey said, without Russia deciding what it's going to do next.
I say to President Putin, over to you now. You said you want to talk, prove it. Accept the ceasefire, start negotiations and end the war. And make no mistake, the pressure is now on Putin.
Now, the military chiefs here haven't just been trying to game what Russia's going to do next, but also what America is going to do next. President Trump has suggested that American workers in Ukraine would provide enough reassurance to keep the peace. That is not good enough for European leaders, I don't think, putting together these plans. They want something much more substantial. They're also looking at what they might do if Elon Musk turns off the satellite signal that Ukraine has been using to defend its front lines. Europe trying to work out whether it can replace the Starlink system.
OK, Carl, thank you very much indeed. Well, as Europe hopes and plans for an end to the war in Ukraine, it was not stepping back from what is looking more and more like a damaging trade war, nor is Canada. Both have retaliated against tariffs President Trump imposed today on steel and aluminium imports, with tariffs of their own on the United States. American tariffs affect the UK too, but our government has not reacted yet. For Canada, which exports most of its steel to the US, it's serious, but Canadians are not taking it lying down.
At the heart of Canada's steel industry, the city of Hamilton is contending with a new economic landscape. As the morning shift clocks off, workers head for coffee, and there is only one topic of discussion: Donald Trump's tariffs and Canada's response.
It's just him. It's just him and his bullying tactics. I think it's all a tactic. He's just trying to get under people's skin.
I think he's trying really hard to destabilize things in Canada to create an advantageous situation for himself and his buddies to get in and do an economic takeover. But I think Canadians are doing a way better job of pushing back, and elbows up, Canada, we're going in hard.
Today, the Prime Minister-designate Mark Carney was here showing solidarity with those facing the brunt of the impact and offering to talk with his American counterpart to find a resolution.
We are ready to sit down with the Americans, with the U.S. government. I'm ready to sit down with President Trump at the appropriate time under a position where there's respect for Canadian sovereignty, and we're working for a common approach.
The city's mayor speaking for a community in shock.
What Donald Trump is doing with the steel tariffs, it's already hurting people in my community. People are worried about their jobs. Some people have been laid off. Some companies are now in an existential question mode, whether or not they're going to be able to survive, depending on how far this goes and how long. It's hurting people.
Raymond Dubosc is already feeling the tariffs bite. His firm brings in steel from America to build industrial machines, which are then exported back to the US. One major order is now in doubt.
This is $1 million contract which may now be cancelled because of these tariffs.
Yeah, so is it going to happen? Who knows? But $1 million, and if they have to pay 25% on that, are they willing to pay just over $1.25 million for a machine that they need? But how, do they really need it if it's at that price?
But it's not just industry which is worried. Almost every business which trades across the border is now concerned.
Has been a shock.
Sarah Wiseman's chocolate shop brings packaging in from America. She finds Trump's talk of turning Canada into the 51st state offensive.
I don't know anyone who thinks that that's a good idea. And that, to me, is probably the most shocking thing to hear. And to hear Americans who seem to be okay with that idea, not respecting the sovereignty of Canada.
In less than 2 months, Donald Trump has plunged relations with America's closest economic partner into turmoil. Not only has he upended trade across this border, but he's also caused an unprecedented rift between allies.
Canada's retaliation is part of a wider trade war already spreading around the world. Two countries which have fought together and prospered together, now suddenly bitter rivals. Dan Rivers, News at 10, Hamilton, Canada.
Now, one question we probably all have is this going to tip the world into recession? And one man whose view I would always seek on such a question is Joel, who conveniently is right here to answer it. Should we be worried? Are you worried?
I think we should be intelligently worried. I think, I'm a glass half full man, Tom, and who knows what's going to happen next. But this is undoubtedly very, very serious. We've got a situation here where the Prime Minister is trying to stay calm. Keir Starmer's trying to plot a perfectly sensible course between two huge trade blocs. He wants to avoid tariffs by getting a free trade deal with the United States and wants closer trade ties with the European Union. You could see how that position he might come unstuck with that, partly because of President Trump, of course. Trump's tariff policy is vague, inconsistent, incoherent. It is wild and volatile. to such an extent that it's impossible really to know what his strategy is and quite how this is going to play out. I mean, financial markets are volatile, but at the moment there's no compelling evidence that suggests that the tariffs have caused lasting damage. That said, the UK is an open trading economy. Trade has made us and makes us wealthier. And if President Trump continues to stick stuff in the spokes of the wheel of international trade at some stage, and who knows where exactly that point is, it will affect us, whether we are directly impacted or not, and living standards for everyone will be affected. Quite how this affects growth, we know it's going to subdue it. Quite how it affects inflation, what happens to the steel that's not going to the United States? Does it end up in the United Kingdom? Do steel prices go up or down here? That's really impossible to plot and predict. As unpredictable, I'm afraid, as the American president himself.
Intelligent worry is a new concept to this desk, but I like it. Thank you very much. Indeed, John. Now, as the day of reckoning draws nearer, when the Chancellor Rachel Reeves announces welfare cuts, Anushka has found out that the government is considering how to protect the most disabled. That will be some comfort, perhaps, to those Labour MPs who can't believe what their party is about to do. They have been filing through Downing Street to make their case and hear the government's. In Parliament, the Prime Minister refused to rule out benefit cuts for many disabled people.
Labour MPs trooped up Downing Street today.
Is this what a Labour government should be doing?
Summoned in so that officials could persuade them to back coming welfare reforms.
Should a Labour government be slashing welfare?
Most want to fall in line behind their leader. But on the backbenches today there were still nerves. Nerves that were echoed by the Lib Dem leader, who asked for reassurance.
That the disability benefits for people who simply cannot work will not be cut.
We will, of course, support those who need support, but also help those who can work into work. They'll be the guiding principles. But what we've inherited is shocking, and they ought to be silent. 1 in 8 young people not in education, work or training. That is a lost generation.
In Liverpool, Kevin Abley receives both personal independence payments to help with the cost of his disabilities and out-of-work sickness benefits, both of which could be cut.
They're the main pain ones for me. Diabetes, blood pressure, then we've got the statin.
Kevin has been unable to work since he fractured his back and doctors discovered a benign tumour next to his spine.
It's like someone booting you in the back. And your legs are just that boiling water feeling, it's just constant flow and pain down the back of my legs.
Do you want to work?
You want to work, but you can't, you're not able to work. You're not living, you're just existing at the moment, and it's hard. I've just been existing for the last few years, and because I can't afford to do anything.
Inside Downing Street, they were making arguments in favour of the reforms. Officials have told MPs that they're furious that details of the plans leaked to ITV News. But the backlash to that does appear to have led to them delaying the announcement so they can prepare the ground. And I understand that they are considering how to soften the blow. Conversations are focused on how to protect the most disabled who could clearly never work. But this is also about saving money. The cost of sickness and disability benefits is set to rise from £64.7 billion to more than £100 billion by 2030. Disability campaigner Ellen Clifford legally challenged the Conservatives' welfare reforms and won.
I'm disappointed that a Labour government is going to take this step because with a decade and a half of austerity and welfare reform, we're really at the stage now that everything that can be cut has been cut.
Ellen is now wondering if she'll be back in court again. Anushka Astana, News at 10.
Grainy dash-cam-style pictures of the ship collision off the Yorkshire coast show the explosion that followed the moment of impact. It was filmed on a thermal imaging lookout camera from another ship that was in the area. The owners of the damaged tanker, Stena Immaculate, said pollution from the ship might not be as bad as it seemed at first. The military-grade jet fuel it was carrying was held in 16 separate tanks. Only one, the owner's statement said, had definitely been ruptured. Now, for hour after terrifying hour, hundreds of passengers were held hostage in Pakistan when their train was ambushed by armed men. 21 of the hostages were killed by militants. They want self-government for Baluchistan, the region where the train was held up. It had set off from Quetta, and as it reached the Bolan Pass, the attack began. Police say it ended with the rescue of 350 hostages and 33 militants being killed.
This was how it started. A trackside explosion targeting a train carrying hundreds of people in Pakistan. Militants from the Baluchistan Liberation Army filmed their attack as they took the Jafar Express and those on board hostage. The armed group held hundreds of passengers at gunpoint as Pakistan's security forces launched a major operation.
Everyone was crying and shouting, Bashir Yusuf says. Passengers were lying on the floor, trying to save their lives. The sound of gunfire was everywhere. I took my children and got down. Some families were able to reunite, while others faced an anxious wait. After more than 30 hours, the authorities said the attack was over and around 350 passengers had been rescued. Officials say more than 33 attackers were killed and 21 hostages had also lost their lives, along with 4 soldiers. Tonight, a train brought survivors back, many needing treatment. Some spoke of their terrifying ordeal. We thought if we stayed inside the carriage, they might have blown it up. The militants warned people to come out, but some refused, so they went inside and killed them. They identified passengers who were in the army using their ID cards and took them to one side and shot them.
Baluchistan's chief minister congratulated the security forces for their bravery. While we were giving speeches, he said, they were facing bullets. Empty coffins could be seen inside the doors of one train heading for the area after the hostage crisis ended. Neil Connery, News at 10.
The former president of the Philippines, who was arrested in the capital Manila yesterday, has arrived in the Netherlands for trial at the International Criminal Court. Rodrigo Duterte was wanted for crimes against humanity for his state-backed killings of drug dealers and addicts without trial in a crackdown on crime that left tens of thousands dead. Now, even before next week's likely welfare cuts, which we highlighted earlier, analysis of low wages and benefits in this country provides some uncomfortable comparisons. Figures from the National Institute of Economic and Social Research show that those living in the poorest parts of the UK are now poorer than those in the poorest parts of Slovenia. Their annual disposable income is £877 higher per person. In Malta, it's more than £1,000, and in the Irish Republic, it's over £2,000 more. Britain is slipping behind.
Schoolthorpe Community Playgroup in Doncaster. The children here have been born in the 6th largest economy in the world. Britain is a rich nation, but its wealth is not evenly shared, and life on a low income is hard.
By the time you've got paid all your bills, your food, you've got nothing left, really.
Gabby and Becky have been friends since primary school. Between them, they have 6 children. They are both single mothers and both rely on benefits. Benefits which sometimes don't cover the bare essentials.
As a mum, you eat 1 meal instead of your 3 meals a day. Some days I don't eat.
To make sure that the kids get food.
Yeah. As long as your kids get fed, you're all right.
That's exactly the evidence that I'm seeing. Years ago, we would never have had families going to food banks.
Janice Jinks is unsurprised. Her playgroup is run by volunteers and charges just £1.50 a session. But you get the sense she'd never turn anyone away.
Society should not be in this position where there's so much deprivation.
And to be clear, 30 years ago, this wasn't happening.
No, we never had funding and having to give electric blankets out and slow cookers at all. You never heard of food bank.
The report states that a key factor driving down living standards for low-income households is the changes to the benefit system since 2010. The other problem is prices in Britain have often been rising faster than pay in recent years, and at Doncaster Market, they'll tell you inflation is still a problem.
In the decades running up to the global financial crisis, Britain experienced strong, sustained wage growth. But then in 2008, pay packets adjusted for inflation suddenly stopped rising. Had wage growth continued in line with the pre-2008 trend, the average worker in the UK today would be £12,000 a year better off.
NISA's analysis suggests wage stagnation is mainly a UK problem and that living standards in other countries are overtaking ours. We need to lift economic growth.
Number one is just with better investment in the economy. Over the last 10 years, we've seen a general slowdown in the investment in the economy, and that chimes with weaker productivity, weaker growth, weaker pay packets.
The government has backed airport expansion as a means of reviving our prosperity. In Doncaster, the City Council's using £100 million of taxpayer money to reopen the city's airport.
So this is check-in, Joel.
The terminal building has been closed since November 2022, when some travel still required a COVID test and when the previous owner decided the airport wasn't viable. The hope is to lure back the likes of TUI and Wizz and open next year.
It's a calculated risk and we haven't gone in this lightly. There are some big companies associated with our technical expertise. It's in the right location, in the right place. It will work.
Doncaster has experienced economic booms before. If you look closely, you can still see the evidence. The age of coal and steam is over and the digital age has begun. Doncaster, like the rest of Britain, is rebuilding and hoping to adapt and prosper. Joel Hills, News at 10.
The colourful and controversial political career of the former First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, will end next year. She has announced she won't stand for re-election to the Scottish Parliament. Scotland's longest-serving First Minister said it's time to embrace different opportunities. She was first elected as an MSP a quarter of a century ago. Now, finally, it wasn't meant to be a tough assignment. Freelance photographer Spider Martin was covering a peaceful march by civil rights protesters in 1960s Alabama. Then, Alabama state troopers got involved. What followed was racist violence that left many of the protesters injured and bloodied and changed American history. Spider Martin was the only photographer there, and on the 60th anniversary, his photos have been restored to inform a new generation.
On one side, peaceful protest and a determination to defend their right to vote. On the other, bristling with violence, the forces of those who would deny that right. This was the start of America's Bloody Sunday, when Alabama's state troopers used batons and tear gas to disperse a group of civil rights marchers. It was a day when a page in American history turned. And there to capture its pictures was a 25-year-old photographer from a local newspaper called Spider Martin.
He was the youngest and the newest staff photographer. And the older people, the newspaper was pretty segregated and the older photographers did not want to go. You know, what he saw with his own eyes and what he captured on film, it was just so disturbing and so unjust. He's a very sensitive human being and he never, could accept this kind of behavior towards anyone.
The violence which Martin recorded took place at the start of a series of marches 50 miles long from Selma to the state capitol in Montgomery, protesting against the racist state government and its efforts to stop African Americans from voting. Thousands of people joined the demonstrations and Martin took thousands of photographs.
These pictures represent that hope, that courage, that fear. All these things come together, but in the end, you see people are doing it because they have a goal. And the goal is simple. To make a better life for their children. It's nothing more, nothing less.
If it is necessary, we are willing and must be willing to go to jail by the thousands in Alabama to get right.
Civil rights leader Martin Luther King told Spider Martin that if it hadn't been for his photos, they could have protested forever and it would have been for nothing. Within a few weeks of Bloody Sunday, federal laws were passed to protect black voting rights, and the last march to Montgomery was guarded by federal troops. Spider Martin bore witness to history. He could also lay claim to have changed it. Geraint Vincent, News at 10.
Remarkable pictures. That is all we have time for tonight, I'm afraid. So, good night, and thank you very much indeed for watching.
For years, Sarah Wynne Williams operated inside Facebook's most senior circles, working with some of its most powerful people, including CEO Mark Zuckerberg. Now the former executive turned whistleblower gives her account of her time at the world's biggest social media company. From 6 on Good Morning Britain.
There'll be some light cloud early on today, but by lunchtime it will almost certainly clear. Heinz Seriously Good Mayonnaise sponsors ITV National Weather.
Well, the cold air has really set in this week. Temperatures so much lower than we've seen so far this month, feeling very chilly for all of us. Freezing, frosty, icy nights ahead, together with further scattered showers. And some of these will be wintry, and further showers continue to be draped around the west and across these central and eastern spots overnight. A wintry mix across the highest ground with a chance of some sleety snow as well as some hail. And temperatures tumbling, a widespread frost, close to freezing in towns and cities, as low as -4, -5 in remote rural spots, and the chance of icy, slippy surfaces too as we head into the small hours and into tomorrow morning. We'll see some early sparkling sunshine, particularly further north and further west. Elsewhere, a little more in the way of cloud than we'd like, with further showers becoming increasingly widespread, like today, and some giving a wintry flavour, some sleety snow, as well as some hail from time to time, particularly where we see the heavier bursts. A little drier for Scotland and the western fringes of Wales, and for all of us, staying chilly.
Heinz Seriously Good Mayonnaise sponsors ITV National Weather.
The rugby world has its eyes firmly fixed as the Six Nations burst through the door again. They are a team on a mission. One of those games that will live long in the memory. The Six Nations title is Ireland's again.
The Guinness Six Nations 2025, live on ITV1 and ITVX.